Before sunrise in the mountains above Cisco Grove, Donald Shrum was tied to a pine tree with his own belt. His legs were going numb, his hands were raw from bark and cold. Below him, the last little fire he had been feeding with paper, clothing, and whatever he could tear loose was dying back into ash. He had already lost his hat, he had already burned part of his camouflage jacket, he had thrown coins, branches, a canteen, anything that might make the figures under the tree step back. And when the short metal-looking thing came close again, with reddish-orange eyes and a square mouth that opened like a little hinged door, Shrum still had one thing left beside him in the branches: his bow. That was the end of the night. The beginning was smaller, an afternoon hunt, a wrong ridge, and a decision to stay above the ground until daylight. Hours earlier, Donald Shrum was just a 28-year-old factory worker from the Sacramento area on a bow hunting trip with two companions. He had a wife at home, an ordinary job, and enough time outdoors that a trip into the mountains was not some fantasy expedition. He was not presented in the early investigation as a man looking for attention. In fact, one of the first things investigators noted was that he wanted his name kept out of it. On Friday, September 4, he went into the Cisco Grove area with two companions, Tim and Vincent. The country sits near the old Highway 40 corridor, not far from the Loch Levin Lakes and the granite, brush, and timber of Tahoe National Forest. It is not desert saucer country in the way people picture old UFO cases. It is steep ridges, canyon drops, manzanita, pine, and dark pockets of forest where distance gets confusing fast once the sun leaves. The three men set up camp and split up to hunt. Shrum worked along a ridge, trying to move through deer country, and the terrain began to turn against him. By evening, he had become separated from the others. He reached the top of a ridge and found that the land did not keep going in the way he expected. It dropped off steeply. To get back, he had to retrace and work around it. Their camp was still several ridges away, and the ridge he was on was longer than he had realized. He kept trying to correct his route, but the light was fading, and every correction cost time. The first fear was ordinary. He had made one wrong call too late in the day. A person can be brave in daylight and still feel the woods change when the sun goes down. The same trail that felt readable an hour earlier becomes a set of black walls. The same trees start looking duplicated. Sound carries differently. Every step feels like it might take you farther from camp. Shrum had another problem. It was bow season. He did not have a firearm. He had the bow, arrows, matches, a canteen, and what he was wearing. If he tried to walk the ridges in darkness, he could break a leg or walk off a slope. If he stayed on the ground, he had to think about animals. So he made the decision that probably felt old and sensible in the moment. Get up a tree, wait for daylight, and find camp in the morning. The tree he chose grew from a rock outcrop. The first limb was high from flat ground, but the rock gave him a boost. He got up into the branches, found a place where he could brace himself, and settled in for one cold, ugly night above the ground. About 2 hours later, a white light moved below the northern ridge. At first, the light did not have to mean anything. Shrum described it as looking like a flashlight or lantern, bobbing as it moved west in a kind of zigzag. He did not immediately decide he was watching a machine from another world. He thought of human explanations first. Maybe a ranger, maybe a helicopter from a station, maybe someone else moving through the timber. But the light was wrong in a few ways. It was below the horizon. It moved low against the land, not like a star and not like an aircraft crossing high overhead. It did not throw a beam the way a flashlight would. It did not flash. And most important to him, it did not make sound. He climbed down from the tree and tried to signal it. He was lost, and for a few minutes the light looked like a possible rescue. He built 3 fires on large rocks below the tree, spaced apart by about 10 feet, and stood between them waving his arms. Then the light turned. It came in from the northwest and closed the distance until it was roughly 50 or 60 yards away, hovering between 2 trees a little above his eye level. Close enough that if it had been a helicopter, he should have heard it. Close enough that if it had been a person with a lantern, he should have seen the person. Instead, he saw a steady white light with no visible body behind it and no sound around it. That silence hit him harder than the light itself. In the woods at night, everything makes some kind of noise. A person breaks brush, a vehicle carries engine noise, a helicopter carries a beating sound that you feel before you see it. This thing came close and just hung there, so he changed his mind about wanting to be seen. He threw his bow back up into the tree and climbed after it. He was dressed head to toe in camouflage, including his hat. Once he got into the branches, he froze. He later told investigators that he thought maybe the dark of the tree would hide him. A grown man with a bow crouched in a pine, hoping that whatever answered his fires could not see him because the branches were black. The light did not leave. It began to move in a wide half circle around him, sweeping east and out over the canyon on the south side of the ridge. As it came around, his view changed. The white point was no longer the only thing visible. Now he could see 3 rectangular panels glowing and arranged in a step pattern below or near the light. They did not look like windows in a visible hull. He could not see the outline of a craft around them. He described the panels as flat surfaces with a shimmering quality, the way aluminum foil catches firelight when it is shaken. They hung motionless for several minutes, close enough that he estimated the distance to the right of him at around 40 feet. The scene stopped making sense in pieces. A silent white light had turned toward him. 3 luminous rectangles were suspended near his tree. The fires were below him. The canyon was open behind them. He was high enough in the branches to see what was happening, but not high enough to feel safe from it. Then something dropped out of the second panel. He saw a flash and a dark shape shoot downward. It moved fast, disappeared into the underbrush, and left him staring into the part of the hill where it had gone. The object that dropped from the panel did not stay still. Shrum said he saw a small blinking light and what looked like the top of a low dome moving somewhere below him. Not a clear body, not a clean silhouette, just enough of a shape to make it worse. It was low, partly hidden by the land, and moving around him through the dark. Then he heard brush breaking. Anyone who has been alone in timber after dark knows how fast your mind begins measuring sound. A twig snap far away can be nothing. A branch breaking close can make your whole body tighten before you think. Shrum was already in a tree because he did not want to be on the ground. Now something was crashing up the slope from the place where the dark object had gone. The geography around him made that sound feel trapped. He was on the point of a canyon. From the source of the noise to the tree, the land dropped sharply and rose again through brush and rock. The thing was not strolling up a trail, it was coming through the rough stuff, making enough noise for him to follow its approach without seeing it clearly. After several minutes, the first figure came out of the brush. Shrum did not seem to know what word to use for it. Person, guy, being. It wore something light-colored, silver or whitish, like a coverall or uniform. The joints and sleeves looked puffed. The head was covered by a hood or helmet, and the face was mostly dark. He could not make out normal features. The eyes were the strongest part, large, dark, and round enough that he compared them to welder's goggles. The figure stopped below the tree and appeared to do something near the manzanita. Then another one joined it, dressed the same way. Together they came down to the base of the tree and looked up. By the measurements in the report, they were very close. The first branch was about 12 feet from the ground, and the figures were almost directly beneath him. He could look down and see the dark face patches, the large eyes, the pale suits, the motion of their heads when he made noise. They did not immediately attack. In some ways that makes the scene worse. If they had rushed the tree at once, the fear would at least have had a shape. Instead, they watched him. They stood under him while the light remained somewhere above and behind the larger scene. He also heard a sound he compared to a cooing noise, something like an owl. It seemed to come from the figures and from the object above or up the hill. He was careful in the interview, saying it might have been actual owls somewhere around him. But at the time, sitting in the tree, he connected it to them. The sound came, the figures reacted, and he had the impression of signals being passed back and forth. From then on, the light was not the part he was watching. The real danger was below him, moving through the brush and stopping under the tree. Then he heard more movement from a different direction. 2 lights appeared first, reddish-orange and close together, like eyes coming through the brush. They were bright enough to illuminate part of the face below them. No nose stood out. The lower face looked hard and artificial. The body was short and stocky compared with the pale figures. It had the general shape of a person, but the motion was stiff. Shrum called it robot-like because he did not have a better word. The robot-like figure came directly to the base of the tree. The report describes it as around 5 feet tall, though Shrum admitted depth was hard to judge from where he was. It seemed to wear or be made from something metallic. The eyes glowed reddish-orange, the color of fire. Its mouth was square, with a hinged jaw that hung open slightly most of the time. He compared it to a ventriloquist dummy's mouth because it did not move like a human mouth. It looked like a piece that opened and closed. The 2 pale figures stayed lower, near the base of the rock, watching. The robot stood under the branches and stared up at him. At this point, Shrum was trying to read intent from things that would not speak to him. That is a bad position for a human mind. If an animal is below you, you can understand some of it. If a person is below you, you can call out, threaten, bargain, or plead. Here he had two silent figures with dark goggles, a metal-looking figure with glowing eyes, and a white light somewhere above the ridge. No one explained anything. No one asked him to come down. No one left. The robot moved to one of the fires and swept an arm through the embers. Until then, the fires were his signal and his comfort. They were the proof that he could still do something. When the robot scattered the embers with its hand, he saw the hand clearly enough to describe it as jointed, almost like a metal gauntlet with fingers. Then it came back to the base of the tree. The square mouth opened wider. One hand rose toward it. A white vapor came out. Shrum said the vapor did not smell. It did not burn his nose. It came up through the branches on the breeze and acted in his mind like a gas. He tried to hold his breath, but the moment it reached him, he gasped. Then everything went out. He woke slumped across his bow. That may have saved him from falling. He was sick immediately, dry heaving in the tree, trying to judge how long he had been unconscious. He did not think it had been long. The figures were still below him. The robot was still there. And whatever plan he had before that moment changed. He said he had been trying to stay peaceful and quiet until then. After the vapor, he believed they were trying to get him, so he went for fire. He lit a book of matches and dropped it. The figures backed up. He lit his hat next. He had hair oil in it, and when it caught, it flared bright. He threw it down to the base of the tree, and the figures retreated farther. The main light above seemed to shoot upward, or at least when he looked again, it was much higher. That gave him the first rule of the night. As long as he could keep flame below him, they stayed back. When the flame died down, they moved in. He started burning what he had. Paper, a hunting license, things from his wallet, pieces of his camouflage clothing. He tore fabric loose and fed it to the small fires until he was down to jeans, t-shirt, and shoes in the cold, trading every scrap of cloth for a little more distance from the things under the tree. The fires never became a bonfire. There was not much brush close enough to catch, and the ground was rocky. He got small blazes going and kept trying to make them last. The figures waited them out. Every time the flames dropped, the robot came closer again. The night settled into a pattern that would break anyone down. The robot moved in. The square mouth opened. The white vapor came up. Shrum blacked out. He woke sick. The two pale figures started trying to get up the tree or position themselves near the base. He shook the trunk, threw whatever he had, and tried to make them back off. Then the robot came again. It was not one clean attack. It became a siege. The robot moved in. The vapor came up. Shrum blacked out. And when he came back, the figures were still there, waiting him out while he ran out of options one by one. He shouted. The pale figures looked up but did not answer. He heard coyotes off in the distance and even tried making noises back, hoping somehow to make it sound like more people were nearby. He broke branches from the tree and dropped them. He threw coins from his pockets, anything bright or distracting. He threw his canteen. One of the pale figures picked it up, examined it, and tossed it aside. At times he could see other movement in the brush, maybe one or two more pale figures scouting around the rocks. He was not sure whether he was seeing the same figures from different angles or additional ones. In the report, he estimated 5 or 6 total, counting the robots, but he was careful about the uncertainty. He did not produce a clean monster inventory. He was looking down through branches, half choked, exhausted, sometimes blacking out, sometimes waking to figures already under him. He knew the two pale figures. He knew the robot at the tree. Later, another similar robot appeared. Beyond that, he could only say that he saw and heard movement in the brush, and still the first robot kept returning to the base. The vapor was the part he could not fight directly. Fire pushed them back, but it did not stop the gas once the robot got close enough. He could hold his breath for a moment, but panic and cold and exhaustion have limits. Each blackout made him more afraid of falling. That is why he climbed higher and tied himself to the trunk with his belt. He tied himself in because the next blackout might drop him 12 feet onto rock while the figures were standing under him. It was not for comfort, it was to keep his body in the tree when the vapor reached him again. Once he was tied in, he had fewer ways to defend himself, but at least he would not fall. He still had the bow. Shrum had 3 arrows left. He waited until the robot was under him again, close enough that the distance was almost absurd for a bow shot. He later said his bow had tremendous force at that range. He drew and aimed toward the center of the robot's body, the general area where a chest would be. The first arrow hit. Instead of sinking in or bouncing away like it struck wood or cloth, it produced a bright flash, like an arc. The impact shoved the robot backward against the rocks. The two pale figures scattered a few steps. He fired again. Another flash. Again the figure moved back. He fired the third arrow. Same result. After sunrise, those 3 shots became the one physical loose end. The arrows came back with enough interest that later an arrow tip was given to the Air Force. But the official trail becomes frustrating. The Air Force did take a tip. Later correspondence says it was not subjected to laboratory analysis. Then it was loaned to the University of Colorado UFO Study Group and not returned to him. In the moment, though, Shrum was not thinking about laboratory analysis. He was thinking that all 3 arrows were gone. After that, the night became even smaller. No more shots, less fire, fewer things to throw. He climbed as high as he could and depended on the belt. The 2 pale figures tried boosting one another toward the first limb. He shook the tree hard enough to make them drop back. He bent it, jerked it, used the movement of the trunk as a weapon because he had nothing else left. The robot kept returning with vapor. He kept blacking out and waking sick. The pale figures kept trying to climb while he was recovering. The pattern had a nasty logic. The robot weakens him. The others move in. He comes to just in time to shake them loose. He said the figures did not seem to understand the tree well. They could get onto the rock, they could boost each other, but they did not climb like men who knew what they were doing. Any movement from the trunk made them retreat. They seemed uncertain, but not afraid enough to leave. At some point, a second robot-like figure appeared. The report does not pin down the exact minute. Shrum was cold, half-dressed, tied to a tree, and fighting cycles of blackout and nausea. Time in that state does not run like clock time. It runs by what is still available. One more match, one more branch, one more breath before the vapor gets high enough. The main object above was still part of the scene, but by then the focus had collapsed to the base of the tree. Whatever had brought the figures there, whatever the panels were, whatever the light was, it all mattered less than the hands and eyes below him. Near dawn, the pattern changed. The 2 robot-like figures moved to the base of the tree and stood facing each other. Shrum could see down through the sparse branches. Between the 2 figures, flashes began to jump back and forth, bright enough to light the rocks and the trunk. He described them like arc flashes. Then fog or vapor began to pour upward in a thick volume, more than before. He could no longer see the robots clearly. The cold had gotten into him. The dawn light was just starting to pink the east. The vapor climbed into the branches, and he blacked out again. When he woke, he was hanging by his belt. It was light, but the sun had not come up. The figures were gone, the light was gone, the tree was still there, and Shrum was upside down, held by the belt he had tied around himself in case exactly this happened. His feet hung below him, his head hung down. For a moment, there was no more strategy to manage, just the work of getting free without falling. He climbed down carefully and started collecting what was left. He found the bow, he found the canteen, he found 2 arrows, he found burned paper and burned clothing where he had dropped them. The coins he had thrown were gone. He had tossed more than $1 in change, and in the morning he could not find it. He left the ridge and made his way back toward camp. When he reached his companions, Vincent added one more uncomfortable piece. He had also briefly lost his way after dark and said he had seen a low, long-lasting light that did not behave like a shooting star. That does not verify everything Shrum said happened under the tree, but he was not the only person from the hunting party who noticed an unusual light that night. Shrum told his wife when he got home. Through family connections, the account reached a retired astronomy professor in the Sacramento area, and a report was forwarded to Mather Air Force Base. On September 25, officers from McClellan Air Force Base came to Shrum's home and interviewed him. They asked ordinary questions. Had he been drinking? Could he have hallucinated? Could it have been teenagers in costumes? Japanese hikers or pranksters? Air Force trainees on bivouac? Shrum rejected those explanations. His answer about teenagers stayed blunt. He could not imagine a group of kids dressing in spacesuits and hauling themselves into that remote ridge in the middle of the night to prank a lost bow hunter they could not have planned to find. He had also contacted McClellan Air Force Base to ask whether any exercises had taken place in the Cisco Grove area. He said he was told there had not. During the visit, he gave the Air Force one of the arrow tips. He also gave them a detailed map marking the location. If he had struck a metal object and seen flashes, maybe something had adhered to the tip. That was the piece someone could actually test. but the trail does not resolve cleanly. Weeks later, Shrum returned to the location with others. The area, he said, had been picked clean. The things he remembered leaving behind were gone. Burned debris, scraps, scattered items. Nothing. A few cigarette and cigar butts remained. He believed someone had used his map to find and clear the site, though that part remains his interpretation. Then came the arrow tip problem. The officer had told him it would be returned after examination. It was not. Later correspondence from the Blue Book side stated that no laboratory analysis had been made on the tip. Instead, it had been loaned to the University of Colorado UFO Study Group and had not yet been returned. If the arrow tip had been tested and showed nothing, at least that branch would be closed. If it had been tested and showed something unusual, the file would have gone somewhere else entirely. Instead, the one object everyone remembers is taken, not analyzed, loaned away, and never returned to the witness. The paperwork did not close it. It left a burr in it. The file leaves two facts side by side. First, it is a single witness close encounter with problems. Shrum was alone under terrible conditions. He was lost, frightened, cold, and later exhausted. There is a discrepancy in the report involving his memory of the moon and the actual moonrise. The file itself notes that issue. No clear photograph exists of the event. No recovered object sits in a museum case waiting for modern testing. Those limits keep it from being sold as proof. Second, the account did not simply vanish as a campfire rumor. It entered an investigation trail. NICAP investigators interviewed him. Sketches and maps were made. Correspondence accumulated. The case was indexed in the Blue Book orbit. Later archive summaries identify it as Project Blue Book Case number 993. And an Air Force reply states that a formal investigation was conducted at McClellan Air Force Base, that Shrum provided an arrow tip, that the tip was not subjected to laboratory analysis, and that the Air Force evaluation was carried in the other category. That does not mean the Air Force endorsed it as alien contact. Other is only a category. But it does mean the report was not closed in the plain way a solved misidentification would be. Cisco Grove survives because it is claustrophobic. No grand speech, no citywide panic, no military chase. Just a lost hunter who made a reasonable decision to get up a tree and then described a night in which every practical object around him became part of the fight. Fires on rocks, a bow across his lap, matches, a burning hat, torn cloth, branches, coins, a canteen, a belt around his waist, 3 arrows into something metal-colored below him. If it is false, it is an odd lie to choose, humiliating, physically specific, hard to profit from, and full of details that invite questions. If it is a mistake, it is an elaborate one, stretching from a light on the ridge to figures under a tree to a missing arrow tip. If some piece of it is true in a way we do not understand, then Cisco Grove is one of those reports where high strangeness becomes small, personal, and hard to shake. Not a saucer over Washington, not a fleet over a city, a man in a pine tree trying not to breathe. By morning, the woods looked like woods again. The ridge was just granite and brush. The fires were out. The figures were gone. The hunter walked back to camp with an account no one would know how to file cleanly. And years later, the most stubborn detail is still the same one that starts the whole thing moving in your head. Before dawn, in a tree above Cisco Grove, Donald Shrum said he looked down and saw something at the base of the trunk that would not leave until the sun came up.